And here we go.
Okay.
From Los Angeles, the home of film and television, this is Film Music Live, a webcast featuring outstanding composers, orchestrators, filmmakers, and more from the world of music for film, television, and video games, talking about their work and answering your questions. Film Music Live is sponsored by the Film Music Network and Film Music Institute. And now the host of Film Music Live, Daniel Schweiger.
Hey everybody, I'm Daniel Schweiger and welcome to a new episode of Film Music Live. I'm happy to have you here. You might say that the New York-based... Oh, thanks, Carter. Well, you might say that the New York-based Carter Burwell is most famous for the sound of dramatic irony, especially when in the company of the Cohen Brothers, who gave the composer his breakout scores with the blackly funny Blood Simple and Raising Arizona. For as powerfully dramatic as Burwell can be to the tune of 2 Oscar nominations for Carol and 3 Billboards outside Ebbing, Missouri, or showing that it's far from happy talk on Apple TV's The Morning Show, Burwell has shown a screwball sensibility with the likes of The Hudsucker Proxy, The Lady Killers, Burn After Reading, Joe's Apartment, and Missing Link. Given an often orchestral sensibility ripe to play to someone's ego, Burwell is the straight man to Steve Carell for Netflix's hilarious Space Force. With the comedian capturing the spirit of George C. Scott, Burwell's militaristic music gives this hapless General Patton of the new frontier a 21-gun patriotic salute to America's finest and most daring troops of the future. Yet there's also genuine emotion, sweetness, and a true sense of wonder to a mission that you couldn't make up if it really wasn't going to happen. Now joining us from his lockdown command center is Carter Burwell. Welcome to Film Music Live, Carter.
Thank you very much, Daniel. It's good to be here.
So when our president first said that we're going to have a Space Force, what was your reaction just as someone hearing this?
Well, I think it's fair to say that we laughed out loud in my household. But in many ways, it's not that ridiculous. It's sort of like a lot of these functions of the Space Force actually do exist in various divisions of the military and NASA, but it did seem, especially by the name of it, it did seem like pretty funny at first, yes.
And did you have any inclination that it would seem like immediately after they announced that they'd announced a television series?
No, that did not immediately come to my mind. No. But it's a good idea, of course.
So how were you first approached to do this, and what made you want to leap on board?
Well, my agent sent me an email saying that Netflix had a show, he didn't name it, that was looking for a composer. And normally, I think he was fully expecting me to just pass on it because typically over the years I pass on television stuff. It's just not, I don't really watch television, don't really understand it, and it's a lot of work, doing 10 shows or whatever in a season or more. So, but when I saw that Greg Daniels was the showrunner, that I think my agent was surprised. I said, well, I definitely would like to talk to Greg about it. I'm a big fan. So that's how I found out about it. I think they were casting a sort of a wider net for composers, but when I found out Greg was doing it, I was definitely interested.
Now, tell me about how you wanted to develop the style of the show. Essentially, the music is the straight man to Steve Carell. It's funny, but it's really playing him from the heart, as it were.
That's very true. In my first conversation with Greg on the phone, I said that I thought that some music that would play Carell's aspirations, play him like a real human being with aspirations and hopes and dreams, and even if leading Space Force isn't exactly what he wanted to do, that he's a patriot and he's going to do his best, and at everything he does, he's going to do his best. His best might not always be great, but he's going to do his best, and that the funniest thing would be to play that, because then the goofiness of the character, the occasional goofiness, is, I think, even made funnier by serious music or straight music. But then also Space Force, in fact, has these like huge goals. They're going to try to get people back on the moon. So having, being able to play that as well, as, allows you to play both sides of this show, which has, as you mentioned at the opening, a huge range of tones. It's not just a comedy by any means. In fact, I'm not even sure that it's primarily a comedy. Some episodes are, it's always funny, but there's a lot of drama and a lot of emotion, and it's so many different things. But I felt that an almost Copeland-esque American, sense of drive and ambition was, would be the best way to go.
What to you makes a great space score or a great military score? The maybe the past scores in your mind that have stuck out that you wanted to emulate here or capture the tone of.
Well, I didn't really approach it that way. I mean, the thing is, the great, to my mind, the great space scores are, obviously 2001, things that are, you don't, unless you were doing a parody, you wouldn't emulate them because they're so, of their own. But they're so sui generis, you can't copy it without drawing everyone's attention to 2001 or any other great sci-fi, thing like Forbidden Planet. And military scores, Patton is, of course, if you've heard it, it's indelible, or Bridge Over the River Kwai. But, and there's something in there that is useful. I think in Patton, of course, the trumpet, the idea of of the solo military instrument for a solo military figure. And I did kind of use that. I wasn't specifically thinking of Patton, but I definitely did use that. And Bridge Over the River Kwai, the whole idea of, even though something horrible is going on, sometimes having the music be kind of upbeat and, catchy, and, because the guy's indomitable. There's that. But I wasn't specifically thinking about the scores, only now that you asked the question that I'm thinking about that. But I will say that, brass definitely came to mind. It hasn't been a major of that many of my scores, brass, but I did think that it's good for the military milieu and a little of the pomposity that, that you could find in those situations. And also good for just the grandness of watching a rock.
Oh, cool. Now, I think your career has a lot of scores where things are really funny and bombastic and over the top, on purpose, especially the Cohen Brothers score, Burn After Reading it, which also has John Malkovich in it, is right up there. I mean, what
Yes.
do you think about that quality, that kind of like big ironic quality about your music, and how well it is suited for Space Force?
Well, that's true. Like Burn After Reading is a good example because the people in the movie imagine that they're part of a grand scheme when there really isn't one. And so by the music playing that grandness, that scale, that is basically the joke of the movie, that there isn't actually anything going on when they imagine an international web of intrigue. Here, of course, it's different because there actually is something grand going on, and Greg, interestingly, really wanted to play that. He didn't want to make fun of the military, for instance, and he didn't want to make fun of the idea of exploring space. He just wanted to find the funny things that are in it. Then, in particular, the idea that when you mix scientists with the military, you're going to get these dissonances that are just going to be comical, and so that, again, by playing the bigness, the grandeur of the actual program of getting people on the moon, you bring out then the silliness of what's going on in the control room and the pettiness sometimes of these personality conflicts.
Tell me about the musical arc of the show, about how you wanted things to build to progress to the big space flight that they finally have by the end of the show.
Well, I have to tell you, when I started working on it, and I think this is not unusual in television, but there wasn't really a script for the end at the point when I was starting it. I had read maybe halfway through the season when I started writing it. And we did sometimes go back and reinterpret some things earlier in the show, either because scenes hadn't been shot or special effects hadn't been done. So it's an odd thing for me, coming from film, where usually I read the entire script and I know where I'm going. I wasn't always completely certain where we were going. So it was more about setting up the right tone and setting up the characters. And even in that regard, like the tone, if you watch the show, the tone changes from episode to episode. Some are more comedic, some are more serious or melodramatic or romantic. There's, I have to say, I kind of had to, find my footing each week, because we were doing essentially an episode a week.
I have to say that probably one of my favorite moments in the entire series is the bit with the monkey.
Mine too, I have to say. I do love that one. And yeah, it's episode 2. And that was one of the last ones to be scored because all the special effects involved in the monkey. But I do love that. I think I love the comedy of that. And yeah, I've watched that one many times, just sitting with my family, because I really like it that much. Yes.
And another episode that had particular standout scoring was when they had the war games, or the capture the flag episode, where the music gets really quite big in that episode.
It does. That's and I'd like to take my hat off. To try to get one of these done a week, I called on a young composer named Forrest Gray to help me with it, because it's just like to write all that orchestral music so quickly was. Well, hard, and honestly, almost impossible for me with other things going on. So Forrest did a lot of that particular episode, and the battleground stuff is just fantastic film scoring. I mean, he really just, even again, as we were talking about, what you're seeing is fairly silly, and Forrest's music just by taking it completely seriously makes it. I think it transforms it into a really interesting. Combination of tones and things. So I have to say, I wrote half of it, but basically Forrest did the whole battlefield. I wrote the other parts of the show, and he just did a fantastic job for that.
Wow. And again, actually a very emotionally impactful episode, is when when they finally have the space launch, and they're walking on the moon. And again, it could be a completely straight score, like, for Apollo 13 or something like that. And it's actually a very nicely moving scene within the show.
I agree. I think, that's that whole episode. I think it's episode 9. They take off, land on the moon, and 10 things get quite a bit darker. But I quite agree. I love that episode. And you're listening back to the music, which when you're in the midst of it, you don't really have a chance to listen back that much and put it in context. But since we finished it, I have, and I was putting together mixes to send to you as well. And it was nice to hear. There is really an arc. There is a sense of the thing growing, and you can feel that in some way a dream coming true, and then the challenges along the way. And I feel that even though, because it's television, a lot of the cues are shorter. The musical cues are sometimes they rarely get to be 2 minutes. Sometimes they're 2.5. A lot of times they're 10 seconds. But still, I'm pretty happy with the sense of growth and development and an arc to the whole thing.
Again, it really kind of is a score. I mean, how much music? I imagine like there's maybe about 2 hours by the end of it.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's about right. Yes.
Yeah.
And we have to mention that just the very idea of orchestral scoring for a half-hour comedy is an unusual thing. And Greg wanted to do it, and of course I like the idea. I thought it would do what I wanted for the show, but most like if you imagine like network television, that would be a pretty hard sell. In fact, almost anywhere that's a hard sell. And Netflix stepped up to the plate and was willing to let us do it with an orchestra. So that was fantastic.
And it was a real race to the wire to actually. It was just amazing, literally from Trump saying this to when the show actually came on. It seemed like it was like made yesterday or something like that. And you really raced to get this done.
Well, that's true, and that's not uncommon. I don't know the backstory to this. They may not have even thought about composers until they had already shot most of it, or maybe I don't know if Greg had really had a composed score before for his shows. Like Parks and Recreation, The Office. I don't think they did, and it might not have just been something he was thinking about until it was all almost all said and done. But you're right. Once we started, it was a total rush, and when you say rush to the wire, we didn't, where we thought the wire was, turned out to be, illusory because of the pandemic. The wire was much. We just the day we walked out of that studio in Nashville, next day they closed that, and fortunately, Universal Studios allowed them to mix the show, the final mix, allowing only 2 people in the room at a time. They were put in place these special pandemic protocols, and we just barely basically got the show done before all the production and post-production stopped. So
Wow.
I'm so happy that happened, and that people have this now to watch during this time when everyone's locked at home.
We need some laughs more than ever. There's some really fun instrumentation in the score. There's a harpsichord. There's a theremin, I think, that comes in towards the ending. There's these kind of like little signatures that you wouldn't expect in music like this.
It's true. I think it's nice that it's 95% orchestral score, and at least half of that, as I said before, is brass. But we occasionally wanted to bring in something that was fresh, that would wake up your ear. The harpsichord plays Malkovich's character, who he doesn't really come to the fore until I think episode 3, and we wanted something to just say right from the top when you see him. We know you've gotten to know Carell's character. Now this is a different person with a different background, different spirit, and we were looking for the most unbrass-like thing. And we sort of, by a series of deductions, felt that harpsichord is maybe the least brass-like instrument. I don't know. It actually was a little bit of a hard sell with a lot of the people on the production, and it's just such a strange sound. A lot of people just it makes the hairs go up on the back of their neck if they don't happen to be lovers of Baroque music. But Greg and I basically managed to sell it to everybody else, and I'm so happy we did.
Now, your one degree of separation from Space Force is the morning show with Steve Carell, who was also in the pilot for that and in the series as well. And the morning show was kind of the linchpin of the entire, Apple, VOD, debut. What was it like to have that kind of pressure to essentially be like the linchpin show?
Well, it was unusual. I mean, how many times do you work for a studio that is just starting up, where you're the thing they're going to put out to, especially a studio where everyone knows the name of the studio, but the studio has never made anything before. It's kind of a unique situation, and it was odd. There was definitely a lot of pressure, and I'll say that for the pilot, every single musical decision was vetted and re-vetted and re-vetted. I can't tell you the number of notes and that I got back, because first of all, from the people that I'm directly working with, like Mimi Leader, but then also from people at Apple that I'll probably never meet, and even Jennifer and Reese are producers, and they sent me notes, and it's like everything was taken with extremely seriously, and it's complicated, because that show, again, like Space Force, the tone of the morning show is complicated. It's not simple, and you can't put it in one word. I think the reason they hired me is that, obviously it's a drama. It's not by any means a comedy. but I think they hired me because they wanted to find something ironic in it. I think, but even having said that, it took us all a while to figure out what that was, what the thing was that we were trying to find. And I guess in the end, what we were trying to find was that the way the characters take themselves seriously, they take themselves a little too seriously a lot of the time, and that there is comedy in that. But it was, I'll have to say, it took a long time, and it was a lot of exhausting every possibility before I could sell some of the musical ideas.
What do you think that they thought that you would bring to the table? I mean, I think there's a fascination always, from network to, facing the crowd is to seeing what really happens behind the scenes of a talk show.
Well, I think that's true. And I think it's absolutely that's half of the interest of the show, right? And the other half having to do with the fact that it turned out to be extremely timely with what was going on in the national consciousness. They managed to get it out while Me Too is still, a big thing, and not to say that it's not a big thing still, but we have enough crises right now that maybe it's a little lower on the list. But it was. I think that what they wanted was for it not to just be a drama and not to be a melodrama. They needed music. They knew they needed music, but they didn't want it to get melodramatic. And one of the first things we established, was we're not going to have any strings. It's just not going to happen. There are really disturbing things happening, tragic things happening, and there's a lot of emotion. In fact, it's extremely hot emotion sometimes. But we're not going to accentuate that. If anything, we're going to do the opposite. And so that that was one of the reasons I think they hired me, is that they knew I'm not going to reach for that. I'm not going to be sappy. I'm not going to be sentimental. It's just not a thing that I really do. It's not. And that's me as a person and as a composer. It's just not. That's not me. So I think by hiring me, they kind of were inoculating themselves from that a little bit. The worry that it might get sentimental or it might get melodramatic. I don't know if that
So now I'd love
question.
absolutely. So now I'd love to have people who are watching this send me your questions, please, which I will start asking with composer Bobby Johnston. And he says that you're such an inspiration to him as a composer, and he's wondering who inspired you to be a film composer.
Well, I will say the first film music I ever really noticed, and the first film soundtracks that I ever bought, were James Bond and the John Barry scores. But that was because, I was like 12 years old and I was planning to be a secret agent, and I thought that I needed the right, music to do that. But I still love those scores. I mean, they're just amazing. And after that, I certainly remember noticing Bernard Herrmann's work, but this is all before I was even a musician. There were, those are two composers, and Ennio Morricone. I guess would have been the formative people for me in their various ways. I wasn't planning to be a film composer. It wasn't something that I was on a track to do. I fell into it when Joel and Ethan asked me to do Blood Simple. I had no experience and hadn't studied. But when they asked me to do that, I started looking at things, and I will say the Hitchcock scores were, so informative. And then, but another thing that really did help me was the spaghetti westerns, and what I learned from those, and I brought it to bear in Raising Arizona, was that you could do a tremendous amount with like 5 instruments. You don't need an orchestra. You don't need 10 instruments. If you choose 3 instruments really carefully, you can have a score that goes down in history. It's something that's people will really remember. So those are some of the things that were really important to me.
Now, James Anthony Phillips from New York brings up, and the band played on. It was a really terrific, really early HBO miniseries, and it brought tears to his eyes and a lot of other people. Last week, we had the unfortunate passing of the ACT UP activist Larry Kramer, who would do HBO's Normal Heart. What was it like for you to work on And the Band Played On?
It was great. That was, as you say, I think that was not a miniseries. It was a film, and I think it was one of the first things that HBO Films did. They actually did even release it in some theaters. Not a great deal, but it's HBO. Everyone knew it was destined for cable, but it was pretty interesting. It had a lot of support from the network, and there had been an issue with the director where by the time I don't even know what the issue was. By the time I was hired, the director wasn't on it anymore. I think we spoke on the phone once, and that was about it. So I was working with the producers on it. But like I say, they were very supportive, and I really loved that film and that score. It meant a lot to me. So it was also one of those steps on the way to learning how to orchestrate, learning how to conduct. I think that might have been one of the first things I conducted. And I can only say what everyone else says about HBO. They're really good taste, and they were very supportive, and they didn't, they knew they were dealing with a sensitive subject, and both politically and emotionally, and they weren't scared. They had to deal with that film and that story brings in so many people, and a lot of people are critiqued in it, real people and real policies, but they managed to handle that all with aplomb.
And a director you've had a terrific relationship with, creatively, is Todd Haynes. With Mildred Pierce, which was a really terrific HBO series, you could definitely say. Did Carol, which you got an Oscar nomination for. Tell me about that collaboration.
Yeah, that I guess the first thing that we did was Velvet Goldmine, which is I think maybe it was late '80s. I know it was fairly early in my career when
Great movie.
But we were both we're the same age, and we're both basically downtown New York type people. Todd now lives in Portland, Oregon. I live in Long Island, but we were from the same cultural milieu, I guess you could say, and the same with Christine Vachon, who's his producer. So she reached out to me, said, Todd, want to talk to me about Velvet Goldmine, and I knew his work already. So Velvet Goldmine is largely propelled by songs. I mean, that it's a music movie about the glitter era, but it needs some music, and I was happy to lend a hand. And my experience with Todd on that was that he's got amazing ears. I would play him some sketch that I was working on. 2 weeks later, I'd play it to him again. We're just going over things, and he'd say, "Did the reverb change on that?" Yeah, actually, I did change the reverb. And he'd say, "Oh yeah, I thought I heard." He would hear these little things that, and it's certainly still true. He hears these nuances, and he is able to interpret music in these fairly deep ways. I like that he's a very verbal person, so we like to get these long, deep, sometimes pointless discussions about what each note of music is trying to say. But he takes music extremely seriously, and I love that about him. So our first collaboration was my role was fairly minor, but then it's gotten bigger and bigger as you go on. As you say, Mildred Pierce, which was basically a 5-hour movie. It was a miniseries, and Carol, where the music gets to speak for these characters who often can't put into words their emotions. And then from this movie Wonderstruck, where in fact half the movie is a silent movie. So I've had a lot of wonderful challenges with Todd. I'll also say I spoke earlier about my not doing melodrama, but Todd takes melodrama very seriously. He's a Douglas Sirk fan, and he will drag me into melodrama. I'll say, "Oh God, I don't want to have to play what this person's feeling right now. Do we have to do that?" But Todd, as I say, he takes the medium very seriously. He's not going into melodrama haphazardly, and he has drawn me into these areas like Mildred Pierce, definitely a melodrama, that I find personally very hard, and as a composer, very, very difficult. But when I work with Todd, I know that I'm being dragged into it for a good reason, and that it'll be good for me in the end.
Now, from Tor Harbin, one of his favorite scores of yours is Michael Caton Jones's reboot of The Jackal. Really fun movie. Richard Gere on the trail of Bruce Willis. And again, a really fun action score. You've done the Conspiracy Theory and other, propulsive scores like that. Would you like to do more of those and talk about working on The Jackal?
Probably, to be honest, I'm not sure that I really would like to do more of those. I do find action, it doesn't call on the, what I think I'm best at, which has more to do with, trying to find out what's going on in the story that you're not seeing and trying to play that. Action scores more often are playing somewhat often. I don't want to be insulting to the genre, because of course there are a lot of exceptions, but a lot of times you were called upon to play what you were seeing. You're called upon to, like, if you've got the audience's heartbeat up to 140, get it up to 150, and then keep it there for the next 5 or 10 minutes. I find it hard whenever I have been called on to do that kind of thing. So that's a challenge for me, but maybe I'll do it again, and maybe it'll be amazing, but I find it difficult, to be honest. I did enjoy, Michael Caton Jones and I did several films together, and I have very fond memories of them. I think, I just loved those experiences. Rob Roy, one of my favorites. But The Jackal was, to tell you the truth, I'm not certain. I mean, I love the original movie so much. I just really think Day of the Jackal is so fabulously made. I'm not sure it was necessary to remake it, but I always like with Michael.
So from Daniel Becker Penawat, I apologize if I mispronounced the name, one of his favorite scores, and actually really one of mine, which absolutely deserves a CD release, is Psycho 3, probably my favorite Psycho movie of them all. And I believe that Anthony Perkins personally hired you after seeing Blood Simple. What was the experience like of working on that, working with Anthony Perkins?
That's right. And also, I believe that there's a Spanish label that is about to put out a double album of the score, which was originally released on vinyl by MCA, and also the entire score. They're putting out the whole thing, like things that didn't make it onto that. Like, it's a collector's edition Psycho 3 score. But it was great working on that. You're right. Tony they were letting him direct Psycho 3. I think it's the first feature he had directed, and he wanted to do something different. He didn't want it to be like Psycho or Psycho 2. Psycho 2 had a wonderful score by Jerry Goldsmith, but it very in a Hollywood vein, and Tony wanted something that would be somehow different. And he'd seen Blood Simple, and it stuck with him. So, yeah, he actually looked me up. I was not, frankly, expecting to do any more film scores. I'd done Blood Simple, and then I was back in my normal life. I had no plans to become a film composer, but yeah, he found me, brought me out to LA, and because they ended up extending the schedule on the movie, doing some additional photography, I was there for 3 months, and basically that's where I learned about the business. I hung out in the offices there, and read the trades and watched how people were running their scoring sessions, and it was a great experience. And I was a big Tony Perkins fan, and I still am. I just really think he's a great guy, was a great guy, and kind of, even though that's the only time I ever spent with him, I do kind of miss him still.
Now, Marshall Harvey particularly loves In Bruges. Martin McDonagh, a great movie. You did Seven Psychopaths with him. You did, and again, the fantastic Three Billboards, which got you your second Oscar nomination.
I love In Bruges too. I really do. And that was the first thing I did with Martin. It was his first feature film. And I will say I have a weakness. We were talking about Todd earlier. I have a weakness for directors who are also writers. I think I love working with writer-directors, because unlike directors who are brought in to direct a script that someone else wrote, writer-directors actually know the answer to your questions. You know, you say, well, why is this happening? And well, it's, you know, generally speaking, you can expect the writer-director to answer it and to really understand it in every way. And I just enjoyed talking to them because, of course, they have a gift for words. So anyway, I really loved working with Martin. He's a really endearing fellow. And in Bruges, you know, he was having a little hard time, as a lot of first-time directors do, where the studio he was working with was giving him a little hard time, and in particular, they were giving him a hard time about the music. I think they had their own preconception of what the score to In Bruges should be. I had my idea, and I have this little rule that I give to directors. It's not always followed, but my little rule is when other people, like producers, studio executives, editors, whatever, if they've got opinions about the music, have them give opinions to the director, and then the director gives them to me. And that way, it's all funneled through one vision, and that way I don't have to hear 5 conflicting views. But on In Bruges, at a certain point, Martin just gave up. He couldn't deal with the studio anymore, and he just started forwarding their emails to me. And I said, that's fine, you can do that. I will just ignore them, and now you've done your job. You know, you've forwarded them to me, and now it's, you know, my job to ignore them. But I still love that score. Really, it's one of my favorites, and I love that film a lot.
Now, John DeSantis is a particular loves how folk music is used in the Coen Brothers film, and one of his favorites is the use of "Down in the Willow Garden" in Raising Arizona. How does the Coen Brothers song selections work, particularly when it comes to these folk tunes? I mean, do you collaborate with them, or do they just basically say, "Okay, we're going to be using this"?
It's a mix. There are times when the script will say what song it is, and that might even have been in the script, because I think Holly Hunter might sings it at one point. And so there are times when it's in the script. Obviously, "Oh Brother, Where Art Thou?" Those songs are in the script. Big Lebowski, not all of them, but a lot of them are. But then there are times when, like Fargo or Miller's Crossing, where that score is based on folk music, but I found it and did the arrangements of it. So it really varies. But it's absolutely true that Joel and Ethan, they grew up listening to folk music. You could probably tell that from their films and from how seriously they take it. And they do feel like when I present them with something, if it came from an authentic source, it just obviously means more to them. If I can say, oh, this is a 17th century blah, 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 or this was from this guy wrote it in 1940s and, played it on in the Village or whatever, I mean, if they love that authenticity and that sense of something having roots and having reference, you can see from their writing and the way they direct, they like reference. And so, yeah, that's, like True Grit, that's all based on Protestant, 19th century Protestant folk tunes. I found those while they were out shooting, and I would send them to them and say, I think this is going to work for this, and I think this will work for this. But that's part of doing that little ethnomusicology is one of the things that we all kind of enjoy.
Now, Henry Stanley is a big fan of your score for Mystery Alaska. Tell us about working in that. Any chance of seeing a Psycho 3-ish release of that?
I don't think that there's any chance of that being released that I'm aware of. But I love that score. I thought it was beautiful, but the movie just didn't do that well. And I think for everybody involved, it was probably one of their lowest grossing films. And so I really like it. And I remember the people at Disney, they were all very happy with the music, but the film just didn't didn't ring the right bells. So I don't, but to answer the question about a release, that has a lot to do with the demand for film music releases. And thanks to streaming, now that it doesn't require, a CD, there's a little more, there are more opportunities to release things. But I will say, I mean, Daniel, you'll know what I'm talking about. I'm not sure everyone in the audience will. If the film was recorded with a union orchestra, that the AFM, the Musicians Union in the U.S., then if you release it as a soundtrack album, you have to pay additional fees, new use fees they're called, because you're using the music for a new use, and that cost does prevent a lot of scores, especially if they're done with orchestra. That prevents them from being released.
Now, again, on the note of fun, good movies with great scores that no one has seen, I have been persistently after you for years to get out Joe's Apartment.
Oh my gosh, I love that score, and that movie is crazy. I know, yeah, but the same situation. We recorded union recording in New York with an orchestra. These are things where, yeah, if you do it with a smaller group, I think it's more, it can be affordable. Like if you talk to record companies, they'll say, okay, is this a union recording? How many players was it? And they'll run the numbers, see how popular the movie was. And both of those movies, Mystery Alaska and Joe's Apartment, I don't think they're ever going to satisfy that formula. Popularity of the movie versus the cost of paying the musicians a second time is, I'm sorry, I had my hands the wrong height there. I just don't think it's going to work. But yeah, we'll see. Things could change.
Now, I mean, I've been asking this about a lot of composers, and especially, you've done so many terrific orchestral scores. How do you see the future of symphonic scores? How do you think they can be done?
Do you mean within the coronavirus world, or just
yes,
or more? You're talking.
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah.
And more in the coronavirus. How do we make it happen?
Right. Well, it's a good question. I mean, that union, and I would hate for anything I just said previously to make it sound like I'm somehow anti-union. I'm a member of the union and a big booster of the union, and I try every chance I get to record my scores with a union orchestra, and I celebrate whenever it does happen. The union is working on rules. They need the same set of rules for for Broadway and for symphonic orchestras and for recording, and it's tough. If you've ever seen an orchestra, these people are sitting next to each other, and these brass instruments are spitting and breathing, and I don't know what to say. I think that there are certain types of recording that you can definitely do. It's not going to be a problem. Smaller ensembles, ensembles that don't involve brass, or wind instruments, harmonica, things where people are breathing in and out as part of the process of where if you can wear a mask, you should be able to do it right now, I would think. People get their temperatures taken, maybe get tests, and that should be doable. But if the instrument doesn't allow you to wear a mask, I think it's going to be tough. So it's going to be tough. I can't really see how that happens unless it's with a very small group spread out physically until there's a vaccine. I don't have an answer.
Yeah.
I wish I did.
I wish we all did. How is your...
Well, I was just going to say, I mean, there are things that are happening now, like, for instance, with the use of Zoom, that could end up being structural changes in the way things are done. I think, people will take fewer business flights for years because they found out that they can do a lot of business without getting on a plane. And that could change, that business. I hate to say it, but it is possible that if people start like doing scores using synths and samplers and stuff to replace what would have been done with an orchestra, that's going to have its impact too. I mean, obviously that's gone on before, but I would hate to see orchestral work, die off just because for a year they couldn't do it. But it's sometimes it's hard to bring these things back, or it takes time.
How has your sequester been? Have you been up to any creative projects, or just watching Netflix?
Yeah, I mean, so I would have thought that by this point, after a month of lockdown, I would be writing music. but I actually really haven't been. And I think there's so many distractions. I have 3 school-age kids, so online schooling, it's basically homeschooling. It takes a lot of my attention. And I chose a weird side project at the beginning of this, which was um, I'm going to learn how to write an iPhone app. So I went off and, this is a bit of a hobby, obviously. I'm not going to become a programmer. But so I've been doing that. I actually wrote a little app the music app. And I've been, just doing that, not for, as I say, not for a profession, but I'll put it on the App Store at some point just to show what I did with my, lockdown. This is what I did. But that's what I've been doing. It's sad.
But
I
back
wish I
to
were right. Joel Cohen he filmed 2/3 of Macbeth, starring
oh
Denzel
wow,
Washington and Fran Dorman, and it's going to be fantastic. But he only shot 2/3 of it, and they don't know when they'll be able to finish it. And I'd be working on it, but we just don't know. There's no schedule, so it's sad to say. But so I just I'm not really writing music.
did they shoot out the battle scenes at least, or?
I don't know. Joel, I talked to Joel the other day, and he said, "Well, I could send it to you if you want to try working on it." And I said, the parts that they have, and because as he said, you already know how the story ends. It's so. But I said, well, let me get my kids through school, and so I don't want you to send it to me until I can actually concentrate on it. So maybe in a week or two, he'll send it to me, and maybe I'll start working on it. So we'll see. But it's in pieces. But he shot most of it, and it's so that's something. But it's kind of what can you do with 2/3 of a movie?
Some people have done more with less.
Yeah, that's true.
So I think one of the real shots in the arm of good energy that we got last weekend was seeing the successful launch of SpaceX, the docking at the space station. Essentially, real life Space Force. Was done by this mad entrepreneur, as it were. I mean, what's it like for you to to watch having scored the series, and now watching this happening? As awful as things are down on Earth, just kind of watching space, which has always represented hope to us.
Well, it's amazing. It has nothing to do with my, my reaction. I think has nothing to do with my having scored Space Force. Even if I hadn't done that project, I would be amazed, honestly, incredulous. Not that it is impossible to get, for America to make a rocket, but it is incredible that basically through this one person's, indomitable insistence, he created an industry, and indeed, like, had put the country back in a position that it hasn't been in for some time. That is amazing, and it makes you realize that I don't know Elon Musk. I don't know if the guy's crazy or what, but you do need people like that, and it's so fortunate to have a person like that. And again, I don't know anything about him, but I'm so glad that there is a person like that who is that crazy and that successful. That's amazing.
There's been rumors about hopefully there's a lot of projects being announced. They're talking about the second season of Space Force, given how this one ends with a potential very funny blow up between China and America. Where do you see the story going if it hopefully goes? And the music going for it as well.
Yeah, I mean the end of the last episode is very clearly written to push it off a cliff in some direction, but you don't know what that will be, and what the parachute will be, for Steve Carell's character. So I don't know if there's going to be a second season. No one's talked to me about it, but of course I hope there will be, and I think that Greg, the way he likes to write is more by the seat of his pants. And the shows he's famous for are shows that were, I think, more done across the season, and they changed characters and developed premises and stories across seasons, and so that means that who knows what he would do next time? You know, almost anything is possible because of that. I think is the way he has developed characters in the past. I'm as curious as anyone to find out.
And I guess my wrap-out question is, what is Lisa Kudrow's character in jail for such a long time?
Well, so first I have to be honest. I have no idea, and I don't think that Greg knows either, or anybody else, or Lisa. I don't think that anybody knows. Although probably people have their own, ideas of what they would like her to be in prison for. I was working on this series. She wasn't cast at the very beginning of shooting. She was cast partway through, and then they went back and shot her scenes because they kind of wanted to put together all of the. Because she doesn't have a large part. It'd be nice if she had a larger part, but the role of the wife wasn't large, so they wanted to put all the scenes together and entice a good actress like Lisa Kudrow. So that's what they did, and shot them at once. So her scenes weren't even there when I started working on the show, and as I would work on the show and I'd see that she was in prison, and then I'd occasionally go back to episode 1. Did I miss something? Maybe I skipped over. Maybe the scene where that explains why she's in prison doesn't have music in it, and that's why I don't know. Because that happens sometimes. I'm working on the scenes that have music, and someone can throw a scene in there, and I'll miss it. But I don't know. I like to think it's a non-violent crime because she's so nice, but she also seems a little unhinged, and it could have been a violent crime. So, and 40 years is a pretty long time. I don't know how many non-violent crimes can get you a sentence like that. So,
well, hopefully we're gonna
say.
Well, hopefully we're going to find out. Carter, I want to thank you so much for joining us on Film Music Live. Thanks to our producer, Mark Northam, for feeding me cool questions from the audience. And we hope to see you all back in 2 weeks or so, where hopefully Patrick Doyle is going to be joining us to talk about Artemis Fowl. Good vibes to you, Carter. Thank you so much for being on.
Bye. Thank you so much.
Bye. Thank you, Carter.